Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. My name is Tom Jenks and I'll be hosting your webinar today. Before we get started, if you'd like to ask a question at any point during the webinar, you can enter it in the questions control of the webinar control panel. We'll then answer all your questions at the end of the webinar. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Armand.
Thank you very much, Tom. Hello, everybody. My name is Armand Lemmens. I am the manager of ITS Enterprise Security, and I'm a managing consultant as well. And I would like to go over who's presenting, of course. So you know, of course, who's talking behind the microphone as well. I will go to the agenda as the next slide. So I have been in security since '99 and with ATS since 2019. Before that, I've worked with several of the large companies and consultancy firms that work with many customers, both nationally and internationally, helping them solve complex security issues, together with my team of security specialists. Boba de Pedersen is one of our guest speakers from SAP's Center of Excellence, and he will present himself once we do a handover later in the presentation. So first I would like to explain how ATS Global and SAP have found each other in the field of security. I will use that introduction to illustrate a big part of the Industry 4.0 revolution as well, and see if we can raise some awareness why cybersecurity is always in the news right now. I also want to highlight some of the trends in technology and how do they entwine with security and identity management. As you can see, we will take a look at smart technologies, some strategic plans for 2021, and the future of identity management. After this, I will hand over to Bo, who has a great insight on the roadmap of SAP. We will learn SAP's outlook and how they are involving their large customer base to keep SAP Identity Management agile and ever improving on its functionality and ever improving on your organizational security as well. In our experience, SAP Identity Management is a very mature identity management solution and handles very well in a complex environment. And that is why we sought out a way to unburden our customers further and take the next step in improving security through introducing managed services for that SAP Identity Management. So we will go over some of the benefits of this development and how it can help you not just stay in control of identities, but can help you the maintenance of complex projects and elevate security from boardroom to shop floor. So how did ATS Global, a company that has a strong focus on manufacturing for over 30 years, align with SAP, which is world's leading ERP provider? It all has to do with the IT and OT convergence. Traditionally, OT was air-gapped environment, but traditional OT has started to change toward an interconnected network with IT. So to meet all the requirements of a modern company, it is necessary for digital information to flow as efficiently as possible among all the subsystems under controlled conditions. All important user groups in the company, from marketing to purchasing and from shop floor to boardroom, everybody should have access to relevant data. While connecting operational with informational technology opens up a great door of new opportunities, it of course also introduces a vast landscape of cybersecurity threats to what was once an air-gapped network. And this is why ATS works closely together with innovators like SAP to ensure smart and secure solutions for our customers. So in the light of the IT-OT convergence, we have seen many trends in the market. The use of IT and IoT devices, robotics, speed and stability of wireless technology, they're all coming into the realm of manufacturing, but also ERP, MES and cloud integration and extensive security measures to protect them all. Instead of going over these one by one, let's take an example. For instance, a C-level management can have a reporting cockpit so they can make decisions based on real-time data that is gathered throughout the company. To establish this data is collected from both IT and OT and presented in a way that makes sense to the receiver. You can leverage the data from IT, ERP, IoT, all those items, using fast wireless and 5G networks and encrypted communications. So we use the cloud's lightning speed as well for artificial intelligence to aggregate and analyze the vast amount of data that you're gathering, only to be presented in a way that takes just moments to interpret. Is an amazing feat on itself that can only be done using smooth integration and full capabilities of several of these smart technologies. So I think it's really important to highlight that many of these technologies have been known, but are only now coming into the real realm of IT and OT, so we can actually use the power of them if we integrate them in a smart way. So what I also want to take a look at is how you can use identity management as a strong foundation for the latest strategic technology trends. And for this, we look at Gartner as one of the most well-known companies that investigate these type of things. We want to look into the 3 columns on the right, where Gartner actually puts down people centricity, location independence, and resilient delivery as the main columns for the trends. So people centricity means that people are still in the center of all business. Identity management ties into this with proper privacy, data, and GDPR. Location independency means that technology needs to be able to follow and support an agile business model. Think about the fast changes several companies have made facing COVID-19. Identity management can tie in with this for the information access that is required, the remote work and mobility that is, of course, now leveraged a lot, and also centralizing policy orchestration while still distributing policy enforcement. On the part of resilient delivery, it is key, really is key in a world which is on a constant threat of cyber attacks. With security by design at the base of all developments, you want to adapt the digital first and remote first policy and AI accountability in operations. Because we all remember, it's not how we fall, it's how we get back up. The resilience is definitely key to handling the threats in cybersecurity as we know them now. So the identity lifecycle and the way it is agile and aligns with support aligns and supports the access governance is an important part of future-proofing security as well. If you don't align the roles within the business, for instance, and throughout the other systems in the backend, you will end up with an authorization nightmare. If you do not have full control of all aspects of the identity lifecycle, you're creating both vulnerabilities and a risk of fraud. Vulnerabilities, for instance, if there's an external engineer coming in that you have to authorize for certain things to do, he comes in for a week, but the account is not cleaned up afterwards because HR doesn't keep a track of the external employees, for instance. It's really dangerous to have those open accounts, of course, there. So you're open to an easier attack because, of course, the ID is just out and about and it isn't locked down. Risk of fraud, same thing. On the internal part, if you don't have proper control of your identity lifecycle, people can gather more and more authorizations in the backend systems, for instance, when they move over various departments. And instead of cleaning up an account before he moves to a different department and giving him the authorizations that are only required there, often you see that the authorizations are stacked. This is also give you a quite high risk of fraud. So it's important to make sure that you build the right and secure foundation for both the procedure and the technical part so your company is ready for anything. And with this, I would like to hand over to Bo and find out how SAP plans with IDM, after which I will give you then an insight on how you can elevate security and unburden it at the same time.
Thank you very much, Arman. And yeah, let me quickly introduce myself. So thank you, Arman and ATS, for having me. My name is Bo Bade-Petersen. I'm part of our Center of Excellence for our Governance, Risk and Compliance Security portfolio. And I will be taking you through part of what we are doing around our SAP IDM solution and how it kind of fits into, let's say, the overall strategy of SAP and what we believe our customers are, let's say, embarking on when it comes to the digital journey. So when we look into, let's say, the SAP on a high level, right, we have this, let's say, new model, which we call the burger, right? It looks like a double bubble cheese from Burger King. But in essence, right, we're looking at the business network, looking at, how can we tap into the digital kind of era that everybody is seeking, right, from a commercial perspective. And we do that, based on, let's say, different ways, right? So we need to have a good foundation that we can integrate to. And it's about, let's say, looking at the experience, right? So what is the sentiment, right, that we are, offering to our customers, and what are the customers' experience, when they're dealing with us and so forth. But also we're looking at, let's say, the intelligent suite, right, which is more the integrated, let's say, business platform and the processes around that. So how can we make sure that we are, processing things in the right fashion, making sure that it's the right people that are collaborating, and also make sure that we are, integrating in the right sense and have the right platform, right? So if we look at let's say, the business technology platform, how can we, make use of the new technology in the right way? So we need to have these, let's say, different layers working together to optimize how different businesses operate. And if we look into that a bit more, and we go into, let's say, the intelligent suite, right? So into the S4 part of things. Well, a lot of this is very, let's say, core for a lot of businesses, that we need to be able to do our finances. We need to be able to, link that with maybe our resources and our planning, and also with the HR processes and experience management and so forth. So we need to have, different ways of working with different solutions. Even sometimes we need to be able to work with different partners as well. And because of all of, let's say, this complexity, we need to figure out how we can make that easier for our customers, how we can make it easier and more agile to support the actual business. And in order to do that, yes, we can leverage the new technology. We can leverage, let's say, the analytics. We can leverage the artificial intelligence and the machine learning, the Internet of Things, and so forth. So there's a lot of, let's say, new technology that can be, or that needs to be integrated into our business processes. But what it all kind of, boils down to, right, is actually how do we manage this complexity? Because we can't rely on all systems integrating, right, in a simple fashion, having the same security setup, and leveraging, security and roles or groups and access and privileges and source systems and so forth. So we need to kind of figure out, how can we best, work with this. And when we look at, what are the qualities, right, of the intelligent enterprise, what do we need to have? Well, we need to have a seamless user experience, right? So we need to make sure that users can work in different applications without knowing basically what application they're hitting. We need to make sure that they have one common place to find information, and also we need to make sure that it's an end-to-end process that they are, going through. They don't need to all of a sudden break and do something, either manually or outside the system, so we can't keep track of what's actually going on. And once we have, all the different business processes aligned and intertwined in a way, then, from a user experience perspective, they get, the most value out of the systems. They can see the different data points and so forth, all based on, the technology platform. But what that also means is that we need to have some kind of instrument to make sure that, we actually manage this in a consistent and secure fashion in terms of who has access to what, and how do they go from one system to the other, how do they authenticate, how do they get the right access, and so forth. And that kind of brings us into, the identity management side of things, in terms of how are we managing identities across the different platforms, and how do we make sure that with these identities, users are able to actually support the business and give access to, exactly what they need for their daily operations and so forth. And when we have, let's say, that covered, we do give them, let's say, a good user experience. We go back to the sentiment that they feel that, yes, we are connected. What I'm seeing is relevant for me as a business role. So I think this is a very, let's say, key way to look at things, where we have, on top, the different, let's say, core processes, right, within the company, but behind the scene, it could be a multitude of different applications, different systems that are basically tapping into each other, and we need to manage, let's say, the users, the identities across, the different systems, and often also across, different domains. For a lot of these business processes, we might have, let's say, partners that needs to be involved, and how do we manage those? We might have, customers at the other end, right, that also needs to interact with our systems, and we need to make sure that we manage that in the right way. Now, when we look at, what should the key capabilities be, right, to kind of support this. And then we need to have, of course, a holistic approach. And now that is just, one part. So we look at the entire landscape, but we need to make sure that the users we have, right, they have the right access to the right system at the right time. So we need to make sure that if a user is embarking on, let's say, a journey with us, then we need to bring them through from A to C in all the different processes, all the different systems, in a way that they do not see, all the technicalities around that. So it needs to go across all systems and all applications. It needs to, let's say, be consistent in terms of roles and privileges that are being handed out. We need to, look at it from a security perspective, from an operational perspective, from an effectiveness perspective, and also we need to make sure that it's efficient, right? And when we look at it, from an efficiency perspective, and I think many of you might already, have experienced that when you are, let's say, going to a company, either as a new employee, or maybe even, sometimes as a consultant or as a business partner, there is some, let's say, latency time before you actually have the right access, before you actually have the user created in the system, before you can actually operate. And that's downtime. That's not efficiency. So we need to kind of automate these processes to make sure we make it more lean, make it more, real in terms of, when is it actually needed. And then the other part is also, the compliant, right? So how do we become, compliant in a process like that? What are the measures we need to take? How do we get oversight of where a user, has access to certain functionality, and whether or not that functionality corresponds to the position that he's holding within our company? And then we, of course, we need to tailor that, right, to our internal policies and how we want to operate as a company. So we need to have some level of flexibility, some level of agility to modify the different processes around that. So that should be kind of the key capabilities, and what I believe we also support from an IDM perspective in this respect. Now, what are the, let's say, the business drivers, right, for an identity management? So of course, if we look at the high level, right, we have, operational costs, we have changing business processes, we have compliance challenges, and they're all, let's say, big drivers. But if we go into a bit more detail, right, and we look at, the experiences and what the statistics tells us, we can see that there's still a lot of manual user provisioning going on. So if you imagine that you're a company that's going on, let's say, this digital transformation journey, where you're including, maybe your on-prem environment with your cloud services, you might be looking at a business processes that spans, 3, 4, 5 different applications. Manual provisioning across that is going to be very, very complicated. On the other part, right, we also look at, kind of, business partners participate in a certain business process. That could be, looking for specific materials or spare parts and so forth. Well, all of a sudden, right, we need to maybe look at inventory. We need to look at, how is the procurement process and so forth. So how do we ensure that these partners are an integrated part of how we manage, let's say, access to our systems in a, let's say, efficient and non-challenging way, non-compromising way from a security perspective. And then, of course, at the end of the day, when we look at the compliance challenges, well, if we don't have a complete audit trail of what is actually going on, if we don't have oversight of where a user has access, then it will be very difficult for us to actually manage that and ensure that these users are not giving access that they shouldn't have, and that these users are not, let's say, misusing the access they're given. And also, in case somebody, let's say, terminates, right, we need to make sure we have automated processes, so we don't have, I won't call them orphan users, but we have users in the system that should no longer be there because maybe their contract has been terminated. So we need to make sure that we have those types of insights. Now, with identity management, we kind of manage, let's say, the entire identity lifecycle. So we manage it from the hiring process, making sure that, once a physical person becomes a technical ID, then, we can manage him, make sure that he's assigned with the right access in the different systems. If he assigns or is assigned a new position, we can elevate or we can change his current access in the system automatically. If there is a, let's say, substitution because maybe, for whatever reason, we have a coworker going on sick leave or so forth, well, we can make sure that, we fill in that position with the right roles and the right authorizations. And if there is a, promotion or a organizational change as well, we have the capability to automatically change that. And the same goes, as I mentioned before, with terminations or resignations of individuals that can be closed down based on input from maybe a HR trigger. So that's all what we can kind of need to do and can do within the identity lifecycle. So when we look at the, let's say, solutions in a nutshell, right, we kind of centralize the identity management. We centralize the process for provisioning access to the user at the right time in the right system. And it's all based on, let's say, rules that we can define, right? So we can customize what the sequence should be. We can customize how a provision should take place, somewhat what are the attributes that needs to be added as well. And if we want to kind of add to that and say, well, maybe, that's just, half of what we want to do, but we also want to do it maybe in a secure way. Well, we can add, let's say, the compliance component to that and say, well, we can integrate to one of the other, let's say, GRC solutions, which is SAP Access Control, and make sure that we are doing real-time compliant provisioning. So when we do assign the access based on maybe an HR trigger, we also know that this specific access does not contain segregation of duty violations as a whole. Now, that we want to do in, let's say, different scenarios, right? So that could be you have a on-premise environment, and now you're extending, because of the digital journey you're on, right, to the cloud environment. So in this aspect, we're looking at identity management, managing, let's say, the on-premise of your SAP installation, but you also want to extend that functionality to your cloud environment, right? So to your Ariba, to your SuccessFactors, to your SAP S/4HANA Cloud, or whatever is out there. For that, we would then have a provisioning service, right? So we have a cloud service that SAP IDM can integrate to and communicate directly with let's say, the cloud environment. That would be one scenario. If you want to add, let's say, the compliance component to that, then we would still have the identity provisioning service, but we would also have what we call identity access governance, which is basically a bridge, right, from access control to the cloud environment. So we can also assess on the cloud environments whether or not we have segregation of duties, critical access, and so forth. But it's all still driven by SAP Identity Management in terms of being the source for request, being the source for triggering if access needs to be modified and maintained in a certain setting. Now, the last part, and I wanted to cover this as well, is you might also have certain environments where you might have an identity management solution up and running, but in this scenario, that system or that identity management solution might not be able to support SAP to the level of detail that is required, and hence, the connectors have never really, lifted off, right? So in that aspect, you could still leverage and utilize, let's say, SAP Identity Management, but maybe set it up as a certain, let's say, type of proxy where you integrate that with a third-party identity management solution. So everything that goes to the SAP environment, managing the entirety of your SAP landscape, could be handled by SAP IDM. So you kind of, don't need to go and develop different, let's say, connectors. So for the three scenarios, you would have a complete, let's say, SAP IDM controlling the entire landscape, right? Both on-premise and in the cloud, or you could have a scenario where you have SAP IDM managing the whole landscape, but also connecting the access control side of things for segregation of duties, or in the last scenario, we can actually manage the entire SAP landscape by itself, and then have an integration from a third party, so you don't need to mess with having different connectors for every application out there, even your different let's say PLM and MES applications and so forth. Now, if we go further on that, then we need to look a bit on what is in stock, what is coming out, right, from an SAP perspective. And when we look at the latest, let's say, release of our software packages, right, for our latest version is SP 08. That came about last year based on information that we received from our customers. So when we look at the SAP roadmap, so SAP IDM is a, let's say, very mature solution. And what we decided last year was to say, well, let's listen to our customers in terms of what are the changes, what are the enhancements, what are the functionality that they're looking for, where is that one magic button that is going to solve some of the challenges that they're facing today. So we did a Customer Connect program last year and got a lot of feedback from the different customers, and came out with a list of enhancements to the SAP Identity Management solution. Some of them are mentioned here. So we have native SAP S/4HANA connector. We have improved search functionalities and so forth. And that's all, let's say, collected in the SP release. And we kind of detail out for each and every, let's say, improvement, what is that functionality, how can it be used, and so forth. Now, The reason we're doing that is we want to make sure that we at least meet customer expectations when it comes to, you know, what this application should do based on, let's say, the challenges that they're facing on a daily basis, running, let's say, the SAP infrastructure. So now we're looking at least for 2021 to actually repeat that because of, let's say, the success we had from last year. So we do have a customer connect, let's say, event going on, our session going on. So here we have both, you know, customers and partners that has submitted again a request for changes to the actual solutions that we have. And unfortunately, you know, we had to get, let's say, the input in mid-April, right? So we've kind of, you know, at the end of that already. But the whole, let's say, influence program that we're setting up, the whole customer connect session that we're setting up, is to make sure that we, you know, get the input, we can prioritize it correctly, and once we have, let's say, identified an enhancement or a feature for enhancement, then we're looking at how many customers has actually voted for that. And if we find that there's 10 customers that have the same challenge, the same need, it goes into the short list, and then we prioritize that so that it is definitely, you know, very customer driven. So the process for that, and what we are typically looking at, is that we are collecting all the information up until let's say end of March, and then we would do an evaluation. We'll do maybe some interviews with some of the customers based on making sure that we understand the requirements correctly. And then we have the, let's say, selection call where we kind of vote for the different enhancement that has come in. And then that's where we start, let's say, the development. So at the end of the year, right, we're looking at, you know, being able to introduce additional enhancement, additional features to SAP Identity Management. And what we're, let's say, focusing on, and I think what's kind of the key things that has come in, at least from what I know, is that it's very much, let's say, centered on usability, right? So making the interface easy to work with, right? Looking at the UI and so forth. And also there's you know, suggestions around, let's say, the REST API and the version 2 that we've set up, but also connectors, right? So what systems can we connect to, and how deep can we connect to certain types of systems? There's come in a list of additional requirements around that. So that's kind of where the solution as a whole is headed. Is we keep, let's say, enhancing based on the feedback that we get from actual customers. That's kind of what I wanted to share with you today in terms of where SAP IDM is heading, and how it fits into, I would say, the overall strategy for SAP when it comes to, let's say, tapping into the big layer, which is the business network. But SAP IDM is definitely a very central piece of that, and definitely is something where I think a lot of customers can get value out, right, to make sure that everything can be centralized and can be managed, right, from one sole system. So with that said, Armand, I think it's time to go back to you as well.
Thank you, Bo. Thank you for the insights from SAP as well. And I have to say, I know identity management since SAP integrated it in the very beginning in its portfolio. And I love actually that you've made the move to a customer-centric approach. It's really beneficial, I think, for the further development even of identity management. So looking at what Bo actually said about a holistic security vision is really aligned with the security vision that we have at ATS Global as well. Because what we really think is that when you do proper security, and I mean really throughout the entire company, a people-centric approach is very important towards security, because you can set all the systems that you have to a strong level of security. But without the proper awareness in the people and the way you handle the people that are working for your company, of course, security just goes out the window. So it's really vital to look at the proper identity life cycle. We show that through this slide always, where we start in the upper left corner with proper identity access management to focus on who is who. Are you say who you are, that you are? And even for internal and also for external people coming in for the company, you want to have proper identity access management. So it's clear who is coming into a building, working with several applications, logging onto systems, etc. From that, the next step really is authorization. So you want to know that once you've established who is who can do what within the systems, and you have the proper authorizations throughout your company, not just on the IT level, but also on OT level. Because what's often forgotten, people think that, for instance, authorizations on a shop floor don't really work because everybody has to do, a lot of things with machines, etc., and you can't bring security into that. But that's not entirely true, because with smart application of security, you could actually look at the proper segregation of an OT network and authorize people for a certain separation of that network. So you can bring proper authorizations to both IT and OT like that. Once you've brought into control who can do what, you also want to stay in control, of course, as a company. It's very important to have proper access control. Well, this access control you can do through, instance, governance risk and compliance. And within that, there are several items that we always highlight. For instance, the emergency access management as well. I already gave the example that, for instance, somebody from who's external engineer, for instance, comes to work for you, but he only has a week worth of work, and after that, his access should be revoked. Excellent example of how it should work. However, what type of authorizations do you give somebody that come into your systems? Well, for instance, in SAP, you often have an emergency access user that you can give to somebody coming in to help you and aid you to have your production system work as it's supposed to be very fast again. For that, he gets a lot of authorizations and he's monitored constantly. And you can also take that to the level, for instance, of operational technology again. If an external engineer comes in, you give him a certain role and authorizations. He can access several machines and settings and whatever he needs to be doing. And we can actually log that to keep an eye and track off what's been done to our system. So instead of going through logs months and months after the fact to discover that something might not be okay, we can actually have that logging done immediately and monitor those closely when everything's going to happen. So that really brings into completion the identity lifecycle. And then what is left in the holistic security vision, of course, are the very important technical aspects of security. So you want your IT, your ERP, your OT landscape all to be very safe. You want your cloud integration to be safe. You want your data communication to be safe. You want the privacy to be secured. So a lot of things go into that, of course. And what we often look into then is what type of systems do you want to want cyber secure? So is it OT, is it IT? What kind of type of level do we need to look into? And have you considered, for instance, also when you look into those systems, the codes itself that are in there and the interfaces that are in there? Because the insight is one of the most valuable things to know where your status of security is currently. And a lot of companies still lack the insight of their current setup because it's very complex. Both in IT and in OT, landscapes are very complex, and to see where all the data is going and if something is coming in from an external network, if data is going out of the network, those things are quite complex to keep track of. So you need proper tooling there to help you and analyze that data for you to see where that really goes. And we offer many more things on that, but this really brings together the holistic security vision. With that, basically, when I always look at this as a house, you put proper locks on your doors and your windows, but what you also want is to keep an eye, of course, when somebody is already in the house. You need the alarm system. That's why we have that central point there says threat detection. Basically, of course, that also is fed by identity management partially to keep an eye on what's going on currently in your systems. If we take that into account, it's also interesting to look at the way that you can combat the threats and the frauds. Because in holistic security vision, you might have noticed that we mentioned these already, but basically these are the internal and the external ways that you could lose reputation, you could lose money, or you could lose valuable IP, intellectual property. So on the threat side, that usually means you have an external threat coming into your company trying to force access. For instance, a ransomware attack, of course, this is very often in the news nowadays, unfortunately, because it's terrible when something like that happens. But also things like CEO fraud, that somebody can impersonate the CEO and, for instance, trigger payments to be done by a finance department without actual consent of the CEO. That money is often lost, of course, and there are quite some examples that hit the news last year and the year before that about CEO fraud. Those are external threats, and how you fight them off properly, of course, starts with identity and access management. Almost 90% and even more of the ransomware attacks, to take that as an example, are performed by gaining access to the IT network of a company by leveraging an identity that was hacked. So if you have strong identity and access management, including, of course, the multi-factor authentication, etc., that comes into that, and you can hook that up to identity management all, that's how you really fight off the most important threats that are currently in the market. Next to the fact, of course, that you want to harden and upgrade constantly your IT and ERP landscape. OT is a little bit different than that. Of course, you can't just push updates to your machines and hope that everything keeps working like that. But hardening IT systems is a little bit easier than that. And we can even automate that, for instance, for SAP. So that really helps to gain security for external threats. On the fraud part, think about things like employee theft, malicious use of authorizations. As said, I had the example where people go through the company, work in different departments, gain a lot of access in that process, and that actually could bring an unwanted type of access that you never foreseen in your roles. So you really want to keep an eye on that. So how can you prevent something like that? With the proper role and authorization management. Well, role and authorization management, of course, is something that you do in the back end, but you connect it through identity management, because if you work on a role-based access system, you can actually create all the profiles in identity management with the roles that you want connected to them. So people fall in a certain category, they get authorizations through the assignment and identity management, and everything is controlled from that central instance. It's very important to have that central control and insight on what's going on in your backend systems. What's also interesting, I think, is the behavioral analytics. Because you're gathering so much information about what's going on in your systems, you can actually start creating profiles that are linked to the normal behavior or systems or people, and you can have those analyzed constantly to see if there's anything that is going on in your company. While it seems everything that's going normally, people are using that additional authorization, for instance, in a way that is divergent from the normal behavior, and that is then immediately noticed by the systems, and you can be notified through a standard workflow, basically, that something's going on, instead, again, of looking into the systems and finding out months after the fact that valuable IP, for instance, was lost. You can actually have that done by direct monitoring on behavioral analytics. I think that is a very interesting part in where strong identity management actually helps you fight off threats and frauds. So let's look at this word that I used, unburdening security, because SAP, of course, is the provider of the identity management tool in this case that we're talking about, but it doesn't mean that it is for SAP only. It can actually, you can actually have different products align with SAP and feed or feed off from identity management. So you have proper identity management throughout the company on all levels of applications that you can use there. So it goes far further than is just being an identity storage. It actually helps you run your systems much more efficiently and faster. I can give an example to that, just to give you an insight on what I mean with a non-SAP system. One of our customers, a large utility company in the Netherlands, for instance, we implemented identity management for both users that uses it for both authentication and authorization of all employees. So both internal and external people, and from office staff to field engineers even. But not just the access to SAP, their business critical planning tool and virtually all other business applications are in there linked to identity management. They manage even building and site access with SAP Identity Management. The most difficult thing for them was always to have the IT staff support this and maintain it. So this is why we thought we can definitely help the companies with putting in a managed service to aid in SAP Identity Management. So what we offer as ATS Global is a 24/7 managed service for SAP Identity Management with active monitoring and a 24/7 service desk and a follow-the-sun principle that has always somebody keeping an eye out for you on the systems that you use. You can see in the insert in the top right actually that ATS Global has offices worldwide that not only support service desk and monitoring, we actually have specialists in all trades that are spread over the globe to support your projects locally if need be as well. So we can handle the second and the third line of identity management for you through, for instance, the active monitoring and also with advanced connectors. We have a lot of experience in building connectors to non-typical systems. So that is actually a great amount of value that you can have leveraging a managed service. Now, how would that look like if you have an actual issue running a managed service, running identity management, for instance? So as an example, if somebody has an issue with access of the management team, and this is actually an example that happened with one of our customers. That was after an update in the identity management system that was not really done well. So the system worked flawlessly, except the update that somebody pushed was not okay. The data of the management team, the C-level management team, they lost authorizations. What they did, what you can do then here is we simply create a ticket in the portal that is custom for you. We have the 24/7 service desk that picks it up and performs a triage to see what's the impact, of course, of this ticket. In this case, third line specialist was involved immediately. You don't want C-level management to wait out front of the gate. They have business to do. It was solved rather quickly. And what follows up, of course, it's not just you solve it, people get access and everything is done. No, you start monitoring the issue as well. So what happened there? Can it happen again? And we report on it on both the issue, how it happened. So we investigate the issue on the actual cause. We gave them insight on the solution, and we keep reporting on the fact that we do now a monthly monitoring report to C-level management that allows them the insight on identity management. So it was really a nice way to see that you can really have a quick solution to a very important problem that was then done. So next to the 24/7 service desk and monitoring capabilities, our use of knowledge in SAP Identity Management also allows us to support and staff identity management projects as well as integrating business, for instance, or if you open new departments that need to be integrated. These can be challenging projects that exceed often the capabilities of many IT organizations. And we can offer then to help and staff the projects with our experienced consultants helping you to fulfill the new identity requirements. We also offer reporting cockpit that gives insight on the procedures and stay in control of your identities, and a custom cockpit even for incident management that makes sure that your company has real-time access at any time for any issues that you could do there. And as an additional added value, for instance, on a different company, we also offer data quality monitoring to make sure that all the data that is put into identity management actually fulfills all the standards that are required and down the line, because often the people that are filling the repository with all the information, for instance, by leveraging HR data and Active Directory data, if not all the fields are filled, basically you have incorrect data. So your users won't be able to work in all the backend systems as they're supposed to. So we can also monitor data quality like that. Next to these benefits, to conclude, ATS managed service for SAP Identity Management can help you basically forget about identity management now and then, so you have a little bit easier life once you have an identity management system set up there. But next to that, we actually offer more than just managed services. We bring security from boardroom to shop floor, and we offer many SAP services, which I highlighted in blue on the right side. But we do not shy away from IT and OT security either. We really want to bring security from shop floor to boardroom, and to make sure that we can do that, we give both security consultancy and project management and security projects, as also offer a host of services that can help a company really get the insight on security, improve on security in a pragmatic way actually. And we look at the backend authorization, etc., but also how, for instance, can you get a proper OT cybersecurity into your company without compromising the availability of any of your systems, as availability is absolute key there. So we have a managed service for IT, the ERP system identity management, as we said. We offer that as well for OT cybersecurity, and we are also very strong in the fact that we want to share our knowledge. So this is also why we have an ATS Academy. So we do trainings on various security topics. And currently, for instance, we offer an attacker's insight training. So you can actually see how your company looks from the outside instead of going through the procedures that you set up if they're all checking up. Now we really take the view from an attacker and see if that gives you the insight to help you improve on your business and your security level. We can also help you raise security awareness, because there's nothing more important than your staff working in a secure way. And security awareness is definitely one of the most understated things, I think, in bringing proper security to a company. Because you can have the best locks on your house, you can have an alarm system, but if somebody leaves open a door, of course, everything fails by that. And there are many examples that we can make where security awareness could have prevented a lot of the issues that companies face. What we also do is we look into network security trainings. For instance, if you really want to look into the ISO certifications, etc., we can help with the certification process itself, but also help you on the insight and the knowledge of what it takes actually to get that far. So we have trainings on that as well. So that really compromises the entire spectrum of that we can offer, and the specific place of the managed service of identity management for SAP that we can offer. And I would like to see if there are any questions. Tom, can you help us there? Were there any questions?
Yes, I can.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, just as a reminder, if anyone wants to ask any questions, that you can enter them in the questions control panel, which you should have on the right of your screen there. So first question is, let me see if I get this right. Can you integrate IAG in the common IDM GRC approval flow, where SOD checks are done on the fly before the access is provisioned?
So can
yeah,
sure. Yes. So I'll take that one. So yes. So IAG, and I had it on one of the slides as well, right? So we basically have a connector where, depending on where you start, let's say the request from, if you want to start it from IDM or if you want to start it from IAG itself. But regardless of how you set it up, you actually have the capability to have IDM integrate with access control using IAG as a bridge. So you actually do that, let's say, assessment of the segregation of duty violations before you, let's say, provision the access to the target applications in the cloud.
Okay, thanks, Bo. Next up, how can we take part in the SAP Customer Connect? I guess that's for you as well, Bo.
Yeah, so the Customer Connect for this year, and I think maybe I wasn't very clear on that during the presentation, but the Customer Connect for this year, you will still be able to, let's say, listen in as a customer and understand, what has been proposed. But in terms of submitting, let's say, proposals for enhancements or enrichments to IDM, unfortunately, that time has actually just passed. But you will still be able to, let's say, influence and actually do the upvote for that, which I think is going to be April 11th. But I will include a link in the slides that we have for additional information. So you can still, as a customer, upvote those requests that has come in, but we do not accept, let's say, additional enhancements for this year. That would have to wait until, let's say, beginning of next year, simply because we need to finalize what we have already voted in and do the development, so we have it ready by the end of the year for a new SP.
All right, thanks. And then just to be sure, do you also manage authorizations in SAP, role, access to transactions, or is it only access to the system?
So we can do both. Yeah, I'll take that. We can do both indeed. So we can bring the roles and authorization part for how to work with identity management, and identity management, of course, to the business, but we can also look into the authorizations of the backend systems as well, indeed. So we've had many experience in actually greenfield implementations, etc., for completely new ways of working with the SAP authorizations for various type of systems. So from S/4HANA to CRM to ERP backends. That's no problem at all.
Okay, and what is the deployment time for a typical IDM project?
Okay, so that is of course dependent on quite a lot of factors. The way, first of all, it's how large do you size identity management? Do you want to use it for instance, only your ERP landscape? So for most of the time, of course, your SAP landscape then, or do you want to include non-SAP systems as well? How far does that go, and how big is your company? How many people do you have working in there that you want to identities basically that you want to maintain through identity management? So from that part, the project of implementing identity management has too many values just to pick a time there. If you look at the managed service, that of course follows on the implementation of identity management. That can be set up within a few weeks after the implementation already, because we have all the elements in place as ATS Global already that we can leverage to bring us up to speed real quick. So the turnaround on the managed service basically is real quick.
Great. And then does ATS Global also perform audits of existing IDM systems?
Okay, so what we do is we always name it as a pre-audit, because basically we are not a certified audit company, so we can't do like the ERP audit itself. However, what we found in our experience is that a lot of companies have an issue once they have an audit, that they have many findings, and a lot of those findings are quite basic things that you could actually prevent quite easily if you just had the proper insight on them a few weeks before or a few months before. So this is why we do offer a pre-audit assessment. So we come in for a very short amount of time, but look into the, using our best practices, look into the company's setup of various systems. It depends on where you want the pre-audit to take place, for instance, on an SAP system. And then we can flip, some of the switches, help you set the systems up in a way that these findings do no longer come up in the audit. So they really are no longer a burden to the often the higher management that has to constantly discuss, of course, with the auditor why something was done, and going back and forth with answers and questions throughout the company to get all the answers that the auditor has. You can prevent that by implementing a quick pre-audit and save a lot of time in the audit and a lot of the red flags there as well. So we do offer definitely help on getting the audit, getting through the audit. But we are not a certified audit company.
Okay, do we have to have GRC to use ATS's services?
No. GRC in itself is not a requirement for the services of ATS. GRC is basically, of course, a tool that you can leverage to, for instance, look at access control and make sure that there are no segregation of duties, for instance, within the users that you authorize for items. But it's not a necessity, basically, to have SAP GRC in there. You can, there are many other ways that you can that you can do the access control and the audit support, etc. as well. It's just one of the things that you name, and I think as an important part of the identity management lifecycle, but it's not a requirement to have SAP GRC to help for ATS to be able to help you.
Okay, and with just a couple of minutes left, there's time for one last question. Again to you, I think, Armand. Can you give a real-world example of a large customer you've implemented IDM for?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, we already have, I already gave the example where we have a large company where we had the example of the managers that were outside. And that's basically the power industry. However, we also have a large customer like a university where we implemented identity management for. And a university, of course, there are two sides to the story. You have the employees of a university. This typical university has usually around 3,000 employees on its side. The first implementation phase that we used was to implement identity management for the employees. And after that, we've been building on the setup for implementing the identity management for the students as well. And that's on average in a year, a population of about 30,000 students. And the interesting part there, I think, is not just to look at the basics of using identity management, for instance, for the systems in the back end, but also think about all the facilities that university has, especially this one, which is built in an old town. So they have many different locations. So there's a lot of property access that you need to consider, but also, for instance, payments in school cafeterias and the lending out books in the auditoriums and the libraries, all that good stuff you can all manage and leverage by implementing identity management, and that's a huge time saver for them. So it's really an interesting way to look at using identity management in a non-typical environment as well, like a university. And it was quite successful implementation because you could look it up. Actually, it's been in the news. They have suffered a ransomware attack as well, just after we implemented the part where we got all the employees on the backend systems using SAP Identity Management, and the ransomware attack really was not able to go any further than the IT systems. So luckily, the setup was completed for identity management, so none of the systems in the backend, the ERP systems, were targeted with that. So we were very lucky with that. So I hope that was a good example. Well, Tom, I think that as usual, once there are more questions, email addresses are on screen right now, so you can always ask us any questions. Reach out to us, no problem. And you can also, of course, send them. We will also contact you if we have any questions that might have been left in the question box of this webinar.
All right, well, thank you very much both to Armand and Bo for presenting that very interesting webinar, and thank you very much to everyone for attending, and have a great day.
Thank you very much, Tom. Bye-bye.